Good morning, everybody. Uneducated economist here. I'm going to leave a link down in the description to an article talking about China and how they failed to achieve the inflation that they were expecting, or that they were hoping for. Is probably the way I should say it. Now, prior to the pandemic, one of the things that was a major concern for the Fed was that they had this failed 2% target inflation. They couldn't achieve it. Even with all the quantitative easing and money printing and the $4.5 trillion balance sheet, they failed to achieve that 2% inflation target that they were going for. Well, on a longer run average. They did achieve it a couple of times, but for the most part, they were under the 2% target. And so when it came to this pandemic, or prior to the pandemic, I should say, they were trying to figure out how it was that they were going to get inflation. Like, they knew they needed inflation, and once they got inflation, they were going to let inflation run extra hot for extra long for an extended period of time. We knew this. But we couldn't figure out exactly how it was that they were going to do it. Like, how are you going to get this inflation? How do you get the prices to go up? Every year you try, but it's not quite there. But then, here it is, the pandemic hits. And the government freaks out. And not only do they react, they overreact. And they react in such a way that it locks down the entire country, shuts down the manufacturing, shuts down the distribution network, shuts down everything out there that's not an essential business. At the same time, they give them a bunch of stimulus money and told them to go spend it. And this wiped out the inventory levels, created a huge demand. And now this demand, going against a lack of supply, created the inflation that they were looking for. So it was very much the breakdown of the supply chain, the stimulus packages that came out, and the distribution network failure or breakdown that created this inflation. If you go and you look at China right now, they are the one place that not only has failed to get the inflation that they were shooting for, but it's the one place that is severely locked down. I wonder why. So I think about, again, when we go back to the Cantillon effect, or the Cantillon effect, and how new money coming into a system eventually drives out the domestic manufacturing and drives in ever increasing amounts of foreign imports. Now, most people look at the Cantillon effect as new money coming into the system, driving up the prices, and the people at the end of the line who receive the money last, they suffer the consequences as they pay for higher priced goods, but their wages haven't gone up. Most people leave it there, but Cantillon went much deeper than that. Cantillon was a French economist from back in the 1700s who wrote an essay that was very detailed about the conditions of economics at the time, but a lot of those economic principles still apply today, and they make a whole lot of sense, especially when you talk about the increase and decrease of money. And chapter 8 is very telling about what happens when the increase of money comes to a state, much like the United States, and then that money starts to turn off and less money comes into the state, and what happens to the people, and how the wealth dissipates and quickly disappears, and everybody falls into poverty. Now, one of the statements that I heard, well, not statements, comments that I saw was that manufacturing, bringing in new money, or exporting uh, manufactured goods to the world and bringing in this new money, causing the destruction of the society, essentially, or the economy of that nation, was the dumbest thing that they had ever heard. And that is the dumbest thing. I mean, if you are manufacturing and exporting all your goods and you're bringing in a bunch of money, that's like a pretty good deal. The problem with it is that most people don't know how to save or use that money to create more profit. Instead, they go into luxury. And once they start going into luxury is where the problem starts to really come up. And now if you go and you read Cantillon's essay, he talks about this happening over and over and over again. And the reason is that most legislators don't understand what's happening. They look at the wealth coming in, they look at all the value that everything is going up on, they look at all the high priced goods, like home prices going up, wages going up, all this stuff going up, and they're thinking, man, this is the good times, let the good times roll, tax revenues roll, let everything, like, just go bonkers, right? When actually they should be is pulling that money out of the system and saving it for the bad times, because during the good times they just keep getting worse and worse and worse with the debts and the irrational exuberance and the extravagant purchases, right? It's like good debt versus bad debt. If you take out a bunch of debt and you go and you blow it on beer and you get all drunk and hammered, and at the end of the party you're like, oh man, now I got to go and work hungover to earn money to pay for that party, and I don't get to keep any of that money that I get to work for hungover on. I mean, it's just, that's the way it goes down. But instead, had you borrowed money and bought saws, use those saws to cut up a bunch of lumber, fasten that together, and sell whatever it is that you made, do that over and over again, eventually you pay off the debt for the saw, and then that saw makes you money. But see, everybody goes and buys beer. Once the money starts rolling in and you have like this, all this new money, and people are just like sitting on this wealth thinking, man, I really want to have a good time with it, what happens? They end up doing exactly that. They have a good time with it. And so if you go and you read Cantillon's essay, he says there's many ways that money can come into the system. And manufacturing of goods and selling those goods to the world is a way of getting money to come in. The competition really starts to come is that when this new money starts to come in and it starts driving up the prices of everything, it even drives up the manufacturing costs of that state. So the exported items that they normally would export to other countries that don't have the goods and services that they are producing, they get more expensive. And as they get more expensive, their trade that they were exporting their goods to, the foreigners, well, they start looking at those higher prices that are coming, and they say, maybe we can manufacture these goods on our own. And that's what they begin to do. And so as this new money pours in, it not only drives out the domestic manufacturing because they are going to find it other places, but it drives up the manufacturing cost of what's going on there, so it further exacerbates the problem. And this is what we got going on here. If you have manufacturing costs here in the United States going up, right, driving the wages up, driving all this up, you're going to find that foreign imports are going to start competing with that. And it's not even the foreign imports that are competing with it, it's our exports. Foreigners are going to competing with our exports because our exports are getting more expensive, so they're going to figure out how to get it from somebody else. That's where the real problem starts to come in. Is that it wasn't even like driving in more foreign goods to compete with our manufacturing goods. People just simply won't even want them anymore because they've gotten so expensive here. See, that's the problem with inflation going up. It's not going to continue. It's going to come to an end. The whole inflation scenario with the rising of interest rates. I mean, look at some of the links that I leave down in the description for you guys. Man. But think about that for a little bit. Like, think about China being the one country that is severely locked down right now, and they seem to be the one country that didn't really get the inflation like everybody else did. Them and Japan, but Japan has a reason for it. They have like a demographics problem. China has a demographics problem too. That's probably one of the reasons they didn't get quite the inflation that they were hoping for. But I think their lockdown is more about trying to get the supply to diminish and the demand to rise. They just don't want to do it with a bunch of stimulus. They just want the supply to be cut and then let that create the inflation. Because if they start stimulating right now, what you're going to do is you're going to create a bunch of debt, and that debt needs to be paid back. And this is where you have like the issue like Dr. Lacey Hunt was talking about. The return on capital starts to diminish as the interest rates fall. So you can't really stimulate when you have lower interest, right? Because it actually causes the economy to slow down into the future. So really what they're going to do is just cut supply and then create the inflation that way. This is kind of the way I see it. That's uneducated economists babbling in the morning. I got to go to work. You guys let me know.